Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you here at City South Church. We're just really excited to worship with you this morning and just thank God for all that He's doing in our lives right now. So let's just worship together and thank Him and praise Him.
Let our praise be your welcome. Let our song be a sign, and we are here for you. We are here for you. Yes, we are. Let your breath come from heaven. Fill our hearts with your love, and we are here for you. We are here for you. To you our hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. You alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. Let our shouts be your anthem, your renown. Fill the skies, we are here for you. Yes, we are here for you. And let your word move in power. Let what's dead come to life. We are here for you. We are here for you. To you our hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. You alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. To you our hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. And you alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. Oh, let it fall, yes, let it fall. We welcome you with praise. We welcome you with praise. Almighty God of love, be welcomed in this place. We welcome you with praise. We welcome you with praise. Almighty God of love, be welcomed in this place. Let every heart adore, let every soul awake. Almighty God of love, be welcomed in this place. We welcome you with praise. We welcome you with praise. Almighty God of love, be welcomed in this place. Oh yes, we welcome you in this place. Thank you, God. To you our hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. You alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. Yes, Jesus. Yes, you are here. You're moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You're working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. worship you. You are here. You're working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Oh yes, that is who you are. You make a way, yeah. You are here. You turn lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You mend every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You're touching every heart. Yeah, we worship you. Oh, yeah, we worship you. You are here. You're healing every heart. We worship you. We worship you. Yeah. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. It's who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Oh yes, never stop. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. 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 Thank you, God, that you're a way maker. Even in the darkness, you make a way. 'Cause that is who you are.
And so Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside. The crowds followed to listen to the teachings of Jesus. Ignore the poor, for they have chosen this life and must deal with the consequences. I say to you, hate your enemies. Hold a grudge whenever someone wrongs you. Pursue wealth and success. Money will satisfy the desires of your heart. Love yourself and put your interests before others. Of course, Jesus did not really say these things. He taught the opposite. Jesus taught us to live with compassion, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Do our lives reflect his actual teachings? Or are we rewriting Jesus?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for joining us. I have a question for you. When you see someone, when you look at someone, what do you see? Or maybe a better question would be this. When you're interacting with someone, or maybe you're observing two people interacting with each other, or groups interacting with each other, what do you notice? How does that interaction work? How do those two individuals or those two groups, how do they perceive each other and themselves? I feel like I'm just old enough that I'm starting to get some perspective of being able to remember back to when I was younger and how things maybe worked a little bit to compared to now. And our society, it seems to be increasingly becoming more polarized. Instead of people's opinions being here and overlapping a bit, now it's becoming you're pushed farther and farther right, and you're either over here in this camp or you're over here in this camp. Of course, we see this predominantly in politics, but it could be anywhere from faith to how to raise kids to, what the best way to, manage a home is. I see this on Facebook, and really internet social media is the worst place because of the algorithms. They push what, if we look at something, we continue to see it more and more. So it's not a good representation. But I find it fascinating on Facebook, specifically for me, is I have friends that you would say on the political spectrum are very right-leaning, and then I also have friends that are very left-leaning. And I find it fascinating because you see what they share and what they say and what they kind of push and how they talk. And my friends that are on the right-leaning, it's saying, oh, look at these people on the left and how terrible they are, and their views are terrible, but also them as human beings are terrible. And then on the left, it's the exact same thing to the people on the right. And they're pushing someone like me, and they're saying, you got to choose one. What camp are you in? Who do you belong to, Tyson? You got to come on this side and throw rocks to these people, or you got to be on this side and throw rocks to that side. It's almost like we're in this river, and you got to choose what direction you're going to go down the river. And you got to get farther away from the other side. But what happens if there was a third way? What happens if you could step right out of the river and walk on the land and go in a totally different direction? Some people refer to this as the third way. Instead of this polarized view of you either have to choose this or this, what happens if the way of Jesus was significantly and radically different? What would it look like if we didn't pledge allegiance, we didn't care so much about what this ideology or these people or this view thinks, or vice versa, what this view thinks? But what we care about is, what does Jesus think? This third way of looking at things differently, you don't have to spend much time looking at Jesus and you see it right away. There's this fascinating story in John chapter 9. And Jesus is he's going for a walk, and he's with his disciples. As we know, Jesus, usually wherever he went, there'd be a crowd. And John chapter 9, verse 1, it starts like this. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" You see, in that day and age, there was one of two views. I think we'd all agree being born blind would be being born with a restriction. You'd be born kind of, not being able to see things. It would make things harder. And so one of the two views was, well, surely the parents had sinned. They'd done something terrible. And so God was punishing them, or God was bringing justice to that sin that they committed by having their child born blind. The other view is, no. God wouldn't do that to the parents, to punish a boy. That he would punish the parents. If the parents sinned, he'd punish the parents. So obviously the boy must have sinned. Something must have happened very early on where he sinned against God, and so God made him blind. So which one is it, Jesus? We have these two options. Choose. What camp are you in? Which one do you choose, Jesus? Everyone would have been expecting him to choose one or the other. And what does Jesus say? Neither. He refuses to fall into this polarized one or the other. He says, neither. This man nor his parents sinned. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. In other words, you know what? He's blind so that he can be healed and God glorified. Instead of choosing one of your two ways of who sinned, I'm going to show you the way of God, the way of Jesus. God being glorified. People being healed. People being restored. Brokenness being made whole. I feel like Jesus would almost be like, I don't care about your camps. What about my way? Probably, I reference it often. You might have noticed over the months. One of my favorite passages in Scripture we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. It's at the beginning of Matthew. It's like Matthew chapters 5, 6, 7, in that range. And it's just a recording of Jesus' teaching. And it's revolutionary. It's fascinating at what he says. But again, Jesus is saying, you know what? There's this view, but I'm giving you a different way. A different way. So in Matthew chapter 5, in verse 38, he's referring to kind of how things are normally done. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If someone hurts you, you hurt them back. They get what they deserve. Give it to them. She says, that's what you've heard. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Think about that. If someone gossips against you, someone slanders your name, you should dig up some dirt on them. You should give it back to them. And Jesus says, that might sound like it would be appealing, but that's not my way. There's a different way. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Can you imagine? And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Go to the one who asks you and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. I want to focus, that one who forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with them. You got to understand, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. He was part of the Jewish people, and they were living in Jerusalem. But they didn't have all the freedoms and all the wants and desires that, as a nation, that they'd want. They were guests in the Roman Empire. They were ruled and oppressed by the Romans. Now, the Romans gave them some freedoms, but if they stepped outside those bounds, they would be crushed. And so they didn't have true freedom. And one of those things was, if a Roman soldier came and he said, "Hey, you, take my backpack, my pack, and you need to carry it for 1 mile." It was law that you had to carry it. So the view would be, there's one of two options. One would be carry it for 1 mile. You fulfilled your duty as being able to live under Roman protection. The second option would be to revolt and say no. There'd be consequences to that action, but you'd also be making a stand. And Jesus is saying, no, I got a third way for you. Don't just carry it 1 mile, carry it 2 miles. Why do you think he said that? What do you think the conversation would be? What do you think the impact on that Roman soldier? What do you think the good gossip would be spilling from that? And then he carries on his teaching and he says, "You have heard that it is said, love your neighbor." Yeah, of course, that's a key in all of Scripture. But then but the saying goes, "and hate your enemy." Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Those are easy things to do, to love your neighbor, those that are close to you, and hate your enemies. That's easy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. See, the way of Jesus, it's usually different, often harder than these polarized views that our society says, hey, in these issues you can do this or you can do this. And Jesus says, no, there's a third way. Why don't you love your enemies? So what does this mean for us? Well, probably the biggest thing when I was thinking about this is that you need to know this third way. You need to know the way of Jesus. And so you do that first by reading the Bible. If you're new to the Bible and you haven't read it much, I would recommend the Gospels. You either start with Matthew, like I said, one of my favorite passages there in the beginning of Matthew, start with Matthew. Or another good one would be start with Mark, the book of Mark. There's 4 books in the Bible that we call Gospels, the story of Jesus. But don't stop there. There's all sorts of things that are teaching the way of Jesus, the way of God, this different way. And so we need to read so we can understand and know it. And another thing we need to do is we need to talk to God. And then we need to listen to God. Have a conversation of talking and listening. And so you could be like, okay, God, Jesus said I'm supposed to love my enemy. How do I do that today? What does that look like? And then listen. Maybe God will drop something in your heart. Maybe you'll be, mowing somebody's lawn. Maybe you'll be watching somebody's kid. Maybe you'll just be a kind word to somebody that doesn't like you for whatever reason. Maybe you'll be defending somebody that others would think that you shouldn't be defending. I don't know what it is. But we need to know Jesus, reading the Bible. We need to be talking to God and listening to what He has to say to us. But probably the biggest thing is we need to be more concerned about the way of Jesus than the way of the right or the way of the left or whatever the hot political thing is. We need to be following the way of Jesus. And so you might be somebody that says, you know what? I've been dabbling, I've been interested, I've been looking, but I've never said I am completely in. My life is going to be about Jesus and his direction, not about, me doing my own thing, what interests me, and I kind of have Jesus as a side. It's no, Jesus is the main. He is the direction I'm going. I'm going to walk on his path, not these other paths. If that's you, I just encourage you to say, okay, Jesus, you have all of my life. And I'd want to encourage you, just let us know in the comments there. There is just a link that you can click on and let us know, just so we can encourage and support you. We're going to be entering into a new series here for the summer, and it's simply called People Together. We're going to be looking at different issues and different situations that involve people. And what is the way of Jesus when it's people being together? And we're going to do different. Instead of me kind of speaking like I am today, what it's going to be is I have lined up different people that I'm going to interview about different topics, and basically saying, hey, this topic and the way of Jesus, let's have a discussion about it. And so you're going to be able to kind of eavesdrop in on this conversation with different people. And so he's going to be talking about issues like, how do we love, even loving our enemies? How do we argue in such a way, how do we disagree with people in such a way that Jesus would be happy about it? We're going to talk about racism. What does that look like? I have a couple that this is an issue in their lives, a reality in their lives, I should say. And so we're going to talk about that and look at racism and following Jesus. We're going to look at community and just the need and the importance of having community and others. We're not supposed to be isolated and alone. And then there's this fascinating line at the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, when God created humanity, he said that we were created in God's image. And so we're going to look at what that phrase means, being created in the image of God. And as a result of that, how should we treat others? How does it affect us? And so I'm really excited to have these conversations and to invite you in and share these conversations with you so that we can just begin to explore and see this way of Jesus, this third way that we can walk in when we interact and deal with other people. So we don't feel trapped of having to choose this or this, but we get to choose Jesus in his way. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to follow you well. I pray that you'd give us wisdom and grace, that we would be able to follow your way, Jesus. We thank you and praise you. Amen. Thanks for joining us this morning. And if you just stick around, there's going to be some announcements right now.
Good morning, City South Church. Thanks for joining us this morning. Just a couple of announcements I wanted to bring to your guys' attention. First of all, our ladies ministry, they will be meeting up on July 6th at 10 a.m. at Hillview Park. Now, if that time doesn't work for you, don't stress. There's other ladies meetups that's going to be happening in different parks at a later time in the evenings. So just keep an eye out for those details on our Facebook and through our email as well. Next is kids. Kids, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an excitement coming up here. Pastor Carolyn is trying to do some curbside and backyard meetups for some of you guys. So if that's something that you're interested in, you'll be seeing some details coming up through this week in the kids' email mail out. So just keep an eye out for that. As for youth, guys, there'll be no youth happening this week as I'm going away for a little bit of a vacation. But yes, coming in the weeks after that, we'll be starting to try to do some mini meetups with bike rides and such. So just keep an eye out for those details as well. Lastly, I just wanted to thank you guys for your tithes and offering and your giving in this season. I know it hasn't been easy for everyone, but you guys have really blessed our church and blessed our community with what you can give us. And we've really benefited from that and able to bring you guys the gospel in more and creative ways. So if giving is something that you're interested at all in, just go see us at www.citysouthchurch.com, and there's a give tab there that you can click. So you can just check that out, or if you're wanting to do cash, check, or debit, you can contact Tyson at citysouthchurch.com. That's it for this week, guys. We'll see you back here next week.